I was talking to a developer recently who's obsessed with AI safety. He spent nearly an hour showing me these complex alignment filters and red teaming protocols designed to keep his latest model contained. He was almost vibrating with his sense of moral urgency, convinced that his specific lines of code were the only thing standing between us and some digital apocalypse. To him, the ultimate danger was the intelligence itself, the ghost in the machine, that might decide it doesn't need us. But then the office lights flickered, just for a split second. He didn't even blink, but I looked out the window at the massive humming transformer station across the street, draped in thick, vibrating cables. I asked him, what happens when your model needs 10 times that power next year? Where does the juice come from? He stopped mid-sentence, his face going totally blank. He started stuttering about efficiency gains and grid stability, but you could see the realization hitting him. All his sophisticated guardrails and moral frameworks didn't matter if the machine simply starved to death. He was so worried about the software's behavior that he hadn't noticed the hardware was reaching a physical breaking point. That moment of silence, that sudden gap between his digital ideals and the cold, hard reality of the power grid is exactly where we are as a civilization. Since the 1970s, we've been trapped in a thermodynamic stagnation, pretending that better apps and prettier interfaces could compensate for a physical world that's been grinding to a halt. We've prioritized risk mitigation over expansion and safetyism over sovereignty, essentially capping humanity's energy utilization out of a bureaucratic fear of the atomic. But the infinite hunger of artificial intelligence is about to shatter that low energy equilibrium. We're being forced to choose between civilizational atrophy and a total reclamation of our mandate over the material world. This isn't just about tech anymore. It's a Genesis mission to reboot our evolution, starting with the very reactors we spent decades trying to forget. That opening anecdote, it captures the tension at the heart of our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into this massive immediate conflict between the exponential growth of AI's energy appetite and the static, strained capacity of our current energy infrastructure.
Exactly. We're charting a course from what you call thermodynamic stagnation toward a potential future of, well, energy superabundance.
And we're going to do that by exploring the technical, the economic, and the geographical solutions. Specifically, the absolute necessity of nuclear power coupling that is being deployed right now to meet this challenge. It's the material reality of physics overriding years and years of digital optimism.
Right. And when we talk about the power grid, the place to start is always the bulk power system, or the BPS. This system is already under, just significant stress.
I've seen the reports. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, they're basically sounding the alarm.
They are. They're projecting that aggregated peak demand, both winter and summer, across North America is going to spike. We're talking 15 to 18% over the next decade.
And 15 to 18% isn't just a number. You have to get your head around what that means. It represents up to 150 gigawatts of new demand that has to be met while keeping the lights on everywhere else.
It's a staggering amount of capacity.
So within that number, where's the most unpredictable, the most accelerated growth coming from?
It's without a doubt the data centers, the DCs. They're projected to contribute roughly 30 gigawatts to that overall peak spike, and that's often lumped in with crypto mining operations.
But the key distinction is the timing and location, right? It's not a slow, predictable burn.
Not at all. That's the critical point. DCs build out capacity fast, and they connect to the grid fast. This creates these unique and immediate challenges for demand forecasting and for grid planning that utilities they're not equipped to handle on such short notice.
Okay, let's quantify that hunger for you, focusing just on the U.S. picture. We need some concrete benchmarks here to really understand the scale.
Scale is already significant. Just last year, in 2023, U.S. data center electricity consumption hit 176 terawatt hours.
Okay, and for context, what is that in gigawatt?
That's equivalent to 20 gigawatt years electrical, or 20 GWYE. And it already accounted for 4.4% of total U.S. electricity use.
4.4% for one specific industry. That is already a sizable chunk.
A very sizable chunk.
But 2023 is ancient history in AI time. The real concern is the short-term surge, right? The projections through 2028. What does that jump look like?
Well, the projections are, frankly, all over the map, which just shows you how much uncertainty there is in AI adoption.
Yeah.
But they are uniformly aggressive. The expected electricity demand increase over 2023 levels.
Yeah.
It ranges from 24 GYE on the low end.
Okay.
All the way up to a pretty frightening 74 DOE in the high-growth scenario.
74. So if we accept that high-end scenario, that increase is going to push the total DC demand share to what percentage of overall U.S. consumption by 2028?
If that materializes, DC electricity demand could account for a staggering 12% of total U.S. consumption.
12% within just 5 years.
Yes, and this is what forces the conversation away from, conservation or purely incremental efficiency. You cannot solve a 12% demand spike with software optimization. You have to build.
You have to build material capacity. So, okay, let's translate that high-end 2028 energy appetite, that 74 GYE increase, into the required baseload power. Specifically using nuclear as the solution, what does that mean in terms of installed capacity?
Okay, so assuming a typical high capacity factor for nuclear baseload, let's say around 93%, meeting that high-end 2028 DC demand entirely with atomic power would require installing 85 GWE of new capacity.
85 GWE. I just want to pause on that. To put that in perspective for you, that's roughly 85 large-scale nuclear reactors or hundreds of small modular reactors, all needing to be built, licensed, and commissioned in the next 5 to 7 years.
Exactly.
That number alone should just shatter any illusions about a business-as-usual approach to energy planning. It demands a Genesis mission type of response.
And we know exactly what's driving it. The largest growth is in the hyperscale and large-scale colocation data centers. And the driver is that continuous massive power required for AI workloads. It's the training of large language models that's the real power sink.
We hear those headlines about massive models being trained. Can you give us a sense of how much power one of these training runs actually consumes?
I mean, think about the training of just a single large-scale language model. Something comparable to an early version of, say, Llama or ChatGPT. That process required an estimated 10 terawatt-hours of electricity.
10 terawatt-hours for one training cycle.
For one cycle, that is not trivial. 10 TWH is equivalent to the entire annual output of a 1.2 GW power plant, running 24/7, all dedicated just to one training cycle. This really underscores that AI isn't just an incremental improvement on computing, it's a fundamental shift in energy consumption.
And this high-stakes, continuous, massive demand brings us directly to why the hyperscaler firms, the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons, are skipping the traditional utility queues and making these direct, massive commitments to nuclear power. Why is nuclear their choice?
The first, and I think most obvious reason, is just reliability. AI workloads are completely intolerant of downtime. They require Tier 4 reliability standards.
Which means power stability that's approaching 100% uptime.
Exactly. Renewables, even with battery backup, simply cannot guarantee that level of baseload continuity. Nuclear energy, with its inherently high capacity factor, can. It's always on.
And the second point has to be citing flexibility. We've spent the last decade putting solar and wind farms in these remote, geographically ideal locations, and then we have to build huge transmission lines to bring that power to the data centers. Nuclear changes that whole dynamic.
It does. Nuclear offers site flexibility that isn't tied to solar radiance or wind patterns. And this is crucial. It enables data center placement close to end users for lower latency, or maybe more importantly now, at strategically significant domestic locations for data sovereignty and national security.
You decouple the DC from geopolitical supply chain risks.
Precisely.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the economic and corporate strategy side. Building new nuclear is famously expensive. We hear about massive capital costs, decades-long timelines. Why are the world's largest tech companies willing to shoulder that financial risk?
That risk is what we call the first of a kind, or FOC, financial risk. Historically, building the very first of a new reactor design, especially these advanced small modular reactors, has been just prohibitively expensive for a traditional utility.
But not for these companies.
Not for them. These hyperscale companies are among the world's largest, most cash-rich corporations. They have the capital to absorb those FO risks.
But more importantly, they are the ones who can guarantee the necessary large order book, right? That's the real key.
Exactly. They drive down the cost for everyone else. By committing to purchasing dozens of these SMR units, they kickstart what's called the BIOC process between of a kind.
So you get standardization, learning by doing.
And supply chain maturity. All of that begins to dramatically reduce the per-unit capital cost for all future reactors. Their investment isn't just for their immediate power needs, it's a strategic move to industrialize the entire supply chain.
The market signal is loud and clear. The need for dedicated, reliable, 247 nuclear power is paramount. So now we move to logistics. What are the immediate and near-term pathways the industry is actually using to meet this unprecedented demand surge?
Well, the immediate strategies really focus on maximizing the output of the existing fleet. This includes reactor uprates. These are small capacity increases to existing plants, which hold a potential 5.5 GW increase.
So getting more juice out of what we already have.
Right. We're also seeing efforts to restart recently retired reactors and most immediately establishing power purchase agreements, or PPAs, with existing nuclear facilities. That's essentially reserving large blocks of clean power just for data center use.
And what's the overall target for this dedicated DC nuclear capacity in the medium term, say by the early 2030s?
The goal, if you combine the uprates, the PPAs, and the initial new construction, is ambitious. It's dedicating approximately 20 to 28 GUE of nuclear capacity specifically to data center demands by the early 2030s.
That feels like a realistic target. It bridges the gap between the existing fleet and those long-term 85 GUE needs we were talking about.
It does. It's the bridging strategy.
And we're already seeing major corporations act on this. Let's look at some of the case studies in corporate nuclear adoption, because these announcements really demonstrate the scale of the strategic shift. What's Amazon Web Services doing?
AWS made a massive commitment. They secured 1.9 GW of clean power from Talon Energy's Susquehanna Scheme Electric Station. That is a gigantic long-term PPA with an existing large-scale reactor fleet.
So that's a low-risk, immediate energy solution for them.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, Meta, one of the biggest drivers of AI and VR infrastructure, they seem to be taking a slightly different approach, looking directly at new construction.
Yes. Meta has been aggressively searching the market. They released a request for proposal, an RFP, seeking nuclear energy developers to build 1 to 4 GW of new generation capacity dedicated entirely to them.
So they're willing to invest in ground-up builds.
They are. And on top of that, they signed a significant 20-year PPA with Constellation for over 1,100 MOW from the Clinton Clean Energy Center. And that deal not only powers their DCs, but it actually supports the continued operation and even a 30 MW uprate of that plant.
Then you have Google, which it seems to be making a bet on the advanced reactor future. They signed an agreement with Kairos Power for their KPFHR. That's the fluoride salt-cooled high-temperature reactor, a very different technology.
It is, and it's a critical signal that this advanced reactor tech is not just conceptual anymore. It's being integrated into concrete development plans. And they're also hedging their bets for the very long term by partnering with Commonwealth Fusion Systems for a 200 MW PPA by the early 2030s.
But the timelines for that future advanced power, they seem to vary wildly. I saw Helion is projecting a much faster timeline for Microsoft.
They are, which just demonstrates the competitive pressure in this advanced power sector. Yeah. Helion is projecting they'll deliver 50 MW to Microsoft by 2028.
That's incredibly aggressive.
It is. Whether they meet that timeline remains to be seen, but the fact that a hyperscaler is staking their growth on a fusion timeline that early, it just tells you how severe their energy planning crisis is. They are desperate for a dedicated solution.
And that desperation, that brings us to the core constraint of this advanced future, the fuel. These advanced SMRs, they require a different kind of uranium, which is creating a massive supply chain choke point. We're talking about the critical fuel bottleneck of high-assay, low-enriched uranium, or HALEU.
Exactly. Your traditional light water reactors, they use uranium enriched up to 5% uranium-235. HALEU, which is required by the designs favored by Google and AWS, is enriched higher between 5% and 19.75%.
And that higher enrichment lets the reactors operate for much longer without refueling, which is ideal for the distributed high uptime needs of a data center microgrid.
That's the key advantage.
But there is a huge problem right now, isn't there? The supply just doesn't match the announced demand.
The core problem is simple. There is currently no commercial large-scale HALEU supplier in the domestic U.S. We are reliant on very limited production from the Department of Energy, mostly through downblending existing highly enriched uranium stockpiles.
A massive supply chain vulnerability.
It's a huge hurdle for achieving energy sovereignty in the AI age.
Let's quantify that specific hurdle based on the announced plans. Let's use the two examples we cited. Google's 7 KPFHR modules by 2035 and AWS's 12 X100 modules by 2040. How much HALEU do those two customers need annually?
The supply chain requirement is immense. To support just those specific deployments, the production of 19.75% enriched HALEU has to ramp up to approximately 6 tons per year by 2040.
6 tons per year. That number really demonstrates the necessity of major government and corporate investment in domestic enrichment facilities.
It absolutely does.
And what does that ramp up look like in the preceding decade? It's not like it all hits at once.
No, it's a rapidly accelerating curve. In 2030, the yearly HALEU demand is projected to be only around 400 kilograms. But then, as the first modules come online, the demand jumps quickly to 2 tons in 2031.
To cover refueling and the initial cores for new SMRs.
Right, and the demand just keeps climbing, reaching 5 tons in 2036, and finally surpassing 6 tons by 2041. If we can't dismantle this bottleneck, if we can't secure this sovereign fuel source, the promise of these advanced reactors, and the AI they're supposed to power, it will stall. And we're right back in thermodynamic stagnation.
So, solving the HALEU problem gets the fuel delivered. But even with fuel in hand, we still have to ask, where physically do we put these massive facilities, and how exactly do we connect them to the data centers? That integration challenge, it leads us directly to the physical engineering challenge of NPTC coupling architectures.
And the core technical challenge here is it's dual layered. First, you have to provide reliable electricity. Second, you have to efficiently manage heat.
Right, the pool.
Data centers require massive amounts of chilled water for cooling. And cooling itself can account for 30 to 50% of the DC's total energy consumption. Coupling addresses how the nuclear power plant provides both reliable power and this critical cooling infrastructure, especially considering proximity. And we define collocation quite strictly here, within 5 miles of the reactor boundaries.
5 miles, that seems like a small radius, but it's critical for minimizing transmission losses and facilitating those direct utility connections we're talking about.
It is.
So let's walk through the 5 modeled coupling options, starting from the simplest and moving to the most complex and strategically independent.
Okay, starting with the simplest. Option 1, no collocation. Grid interconnected. This is the standard utility setup you're familiar with. The DC gets power from the bulk power system, the BPS, and the NPP is also connected to the BPS, just feeding its power in.
So they essentially never see each other directly. The grid itself acts as the buffer for reliability.
Correct. No specialized infrastructure is needed between the two facilities, and there's no impact on either facility's design for reliability purposes. The entire regional grid guarantees the supply.
Okay, then we move to the first level of integration, which still relies pretty heavily on the grid. Option 2, collocation with direct connection and full power export.
Here, the NPP and DC are adjacent. Maybe they share a substation. They're directly connected physically. However, the NPP still exports all of its power to the BPS.
Yeah.
Legally, this is the least complex option because the NPP operates exactly as it always has. But, as you said, it misses out on potential site-specific efficiencies.
Now, the true shift toward energy independence starts with option 3, collocation with a direct connection behind the meter, BTM. This is where things get legally complicated.
This is the most crucial architectural pivot. In a BTM setup, the NPP and DC are adjacent, directly connected. The DC is supplied first. It takes its dedicated baseload power directly from the plant, and the NPP sells only the excess power to the grid.
And the economic benefits are huge. Reduced transmission fees, protection from BPS volatility.
Immense.
Yeah.
But BTM means you're wading into regulatory minefields, specifically with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC.
Why does FERC take issue with these massive BTM loads? What's the problem?
The issue is really market fairness and grid contribution. When a DC is supplied behind the meter, it complicates how the nuclear plant contributes to overall regional grid stability and reserves. More critically, it bypasses the standard transmission fees and system upkeep charges that all other grid users have to pay.
So it opens up major legal battles over market fairness, and it makes option 3 a really difficult, highly scrutinized path, even though it's more efficient.
Exactly.
All right, let's look at the ultimate level of independence, option 4, collocation, islanded microgrid. This is the energy sovereignty dream, isn't it?
It is. Here, the NPP and the DC are directly connected and completely independent of the bulk power system. This is ideal for maximum reliability, eliminating exposure to BPS outages, or for remote siting where there's no robust grid connection. The cost of redundancy, however, is immense.
Explain that redundancy. If the data center needs that Tier 4 reliability and the only power source is the NPP, what happens when it's time for refueling or maintenance?
You must have full on-site redundancy for the entire DC load. This means you need backup NPP units or massive, complex arrays of diesel generators or battery storage capable of sustaining operations during any planned or unplanned NPP outage. This drastically drives up the capital costs because you're essentially building two power systems for one load.
And that leads us to the practical compromise. Option 5. Collocation microgrid with backup interconnection.
This is the hybrid model. They're directly connected, but they maintain a limited BPS interconnection. This connection is typically only sized to supply, say, safety-critical NPP loads during a shutdown or maybe minimal short-term DC backup power. It offers high independence while retaining a vital safety net, without the immense cost of full on-site redundancy you see in a completely islanded system.
Regardless of which coupling option they choose, the AI workload demands the highest possible standards for uptime. We hear the term Tier 4 reliability constantly. Can you just elaborate on the Uptime Institute tier classifications and why Tier 4 is the gold standard for these hyperscalers?
Sure. The Uptime Institute classifications from Tier 1 to Tier 4, they standardize reliability based on infrastructure design. Tier 1 is basic, non-redundant. Tier 4 is mission critical. Its key requirement isn't just a high capacity factor, it's concurrent maintainability.
Concurrent maintainability. What does that mean in practice for the electrical architecture?
It means you have to be able to perform planned maintenance on any component. The electrical topology, distribution paths, UPS units, cooling loops, without disrupting the ongoing service.
And you do that through compartmentalization.
Exactly. Ensuring complementary systems are physically isolated and requiring completely multiple redundant distribution paths and dedicated isolated power sources throughout the entire facility. The nuclear plant provides that continuous source for all those redundant paths.
We mentioned cooling as being half the challenge. This is where the coupling becomes truly efficient, right? You're not just providing electrons, you're managing thermodynamics.
Exactly. This is the efficiency gain of the heat exchange advantage. Since 30 to 50% of the DC's energy budget goes to cooling, nuclear waste heat can be repurposed. High-temperature reactors, like the HTGRs or FHRs we discussed, they produce waste heat at temperatures that are suitable for powering absorption chillers.
So instead of using electricity from the reactor to run traditional vapor compression chillers to cool the data center, you use the reactor's own waste heat to power a different type of chiller. You're effectively offloading that 30 to 50% cooling demand from the electrical grid.
Precisely. You significantly improve the overall system efficiency by turning a waste product into a primary service. This is a game changer for the overall system economics, and it represents a huge leap in human energy utilization, moving away from that stagnation we talked about.
We've established the enormous power requirement, we've secured the hypothetical fuel supply, and we've designed the optimal coupling architecture. Now we face the most fundamental physical challenge: siting. Where can we actually put these multi-gigawatt power and data complexes?
The constraints of geography are immense. They're primarily driven by resource requirements. We use advanced GIS tools like Sage to map suitability, and the data is it's unambiguous. The cooling water requirement is the single most significant barrier to greenfield siting. It's especially for large facilities west of the Mississippi River where water resources are already stressed.
And that immediately differentiates the suitability profile based on how the DC itself is cooled, doesn't it?
It does. City water-cooled DCs, which rely on municipal supplies, they show high viability across almost the entire contiguous U.S. This is because they place less localized strain on fresh resources.
But if you switch to fresh water...
If you switch to freshwater-cooled DCs, the siting viability drops dramatically. You face much greater restriction across the western and midwestern states where local freshwater withdrawal is highly restricted or, in some cases, outright prohibited.
So if we look at the collocation findings, the most geographically flexible solution is combining an SMR with a city water-cooled DC.
That combination offers the broadest siting potential. It particularly excels in the Midwest. States like Indiana, Iowa, Illinois show high suitability because of favorable grid connections, lower population density, coupled with sufficient access to city water, or just lower water stress overall.
But when you look at the massive light water reactors, their water consumption is already so high that the DC's needs are almost negligible in comparison.
That's the subtlety of it. For large LWRs, their inherent high water consumption already dominates the siting decision. Introducing a freshwater cooled DC adds minimal additional constraint because the reactor's operational requirements are already the limiting factor. You're already building next to a major water source, so the DC addition is often permissible.
This brings us to a massive opportunity, avoiding the entire greenfield regulatory headache by leveraging the brownfield opportunity repurposing existing energy sites.
Repurposing existing sites is a cornerstone of this capacity build-out. It accelerates timelines, it drastically reduces regulatory friction because licenses often exist or are easier to obtain, and most importantly, it leverages existing, robust grid connections and critically existing workforces.
Let's start with existing NPP sites. Out of the 54 operational nuclear sites we have, how many are suitable to host a hyperscale DC?
A staggering 87%. 47 sites across 27 states are suitable to host a hyperscale DC, meaning a 200-acre facility within that required 5-mile collocation radius.
And for the truly massive ones?
24% of those sites, so 13 locations, could host a gigawatt-scale DC, which requires 2,000 acres. This means that a significant portion of our immediate data center demand could be met simply by using the physical land adjacent to existing reactors.
And then there's the truly massive opportunity presented by retiring coal-fired power plants. Why are these sites considered a goldmine for a nuclear deployment?
They're ideal because they solve the 3 biggest siting problems instantly. They already have existing robust power connectivity into the BPS, which eliminates huge transmission costs. They have existing water availability infrastructure, and they have an existing skilled workforce that can transition into the nuclear sector.
What are the numbers for CPK suitability?
Of the CPP sites that have been evaluated, 93% are suitable for co-locating an SMR and a hyperscale DC. The top states for this co-location opportunity include Wyoming, Indiana, and Kentucky. These are sites strategically placed to transition regional energy economies away from coal and directly into high-tech nuclear power.
But wait, a point of skepticism here. Aren't these former coal sites often saddled with complex environmental liabilities? Doesn't that make the promise of accelerated timelines immediately questionable? I mean, doesn't the cost of cleanup offset the benefit of the existing infrastructure?
That's a critical question. And while environmental remediation is necessary, the financial and regulatory benefit of inheriting transmission rights and connections, which can take a decade to acquire for a greenfield site, often outweighs that cleanup cost. Furthermore, in many of these states like Wyoming and Kentucky, there's strong political and regional support for maintaining high-wage energy jobs, which further lubricates the permitting process for new nuclear technology on existing energy land.
Okay, so once a site is chosen, you have to decide on the reactor size, a large reactor versus an SMR. This becomes an exercise in optimizing reactor size using levelized cost of electricity, or LCOE, analysis, and the ideal capacity depends entirely on the coupling option chosen.
Right. LCOE measures the lifetime cost of building and operating a power plant divided by the expected energy output. The goal is the minimum cost per megawatt hour.
For grid-connected systems, so options 1, 2, and 5, the LCOE analysis seems pretty straightforward. It just prioritizes economy of scale.
Absolutely. These options prefer larger reactors, typically a 1,000 MW unit, to leverage massive economies of scale. The assumption is that since the BPS provides reliability, you only need 1 unit. This results in the lowest LCOE potentially dropping to $72 per MWH for the highest demand campuses, like a 6,000 MW demand.
But for the highest reliability islanded systems, that LCOE picture flips completely. For grid-independent systems options 3 and 4, the model favors smaller units.
Yes. For an islanded microgrid, the requirement for concurrent maintainability and on-site redundancy during refueling is paramount. You can't shut down the entire 1,000 MW DC for 3 months while your single reactor refuels.
So these systems generally prefer multiple smaller SMRs or microreactors that can be refueled sequentially.
Exactly.
Can you give us a concrete example of that cost trade-off?
Sure. Consider a 1,000 MW DC demand operating in a completely islanded microgrid. The model favors using 2150 MW units. This configuration ensures that during any given maintenance cycle, you only lose 50 MW of power, which can be covered by the other 20 units.
But you're building 21 small plants instead of 1 large one. The economies of scale vanish.
They do. The resulting LCOE rises significantly to around $103 per MWH.
So you're saying they are paying a 30% premium per megawatt hour, the difference between $72 and $103, just for the peace of mind of being completely independent of the bulk power system.
That's the strategic cost of energy sovereignty. They are paying that premium for reliable, dedicated, high uptime power. They are minimizing regulatory exposure and guaranteeing Tier 4 reliability, which, for mission-critical AI workloads, is a necessity, not a luxury. That cost is just absorbed as a strategic business asset.
The decision to pursue these complex nuclear coupling strategies isn't just about electrons and dollars. It has profound strategic sovereignty implications and creates massive local economic windfalls. Let's quantify the economic impact of these co-location projects.
We modeled the annual operations impact of co-locating a 1 GW DC campus with a 1.2 to 1.3 GW NPP. The results are startling, really, because of the nature of the data center industry itself.
Data centers often get criticized for being job-light compared to the massive power they consume. Is that fair?
It's misleading. While the direct number of employees on-site might be lower than a traditional factory, the data center operation generates an incredibly high economic multiplier.
How high?
The DC operations employment multiplier is 6.3 total jobs created or sustained per one direct DC job. That's compared to 4.0 for a large nuclear reactor. The DC supply chain for maintenance, networking equipment, security, specialized services is proportionally much larger than the direct employment.
So what does this translate to in total job creation for a single co-located campus in, say, an urban setting?
A co-located hyperscale DC company campus generates nearly 1,700 direct jobs for annual operations. These are high-skill, high-wage positions. But it supports an additional 7,300 jobs, totaling over 9,000 workers, through supply chain activity and community spending.
And the total economic output?
The total annual economic output in an urban environment is projected to reach $2.5 billion. This isn't just a power plant. It's a regional economic engine.
And how do those economic impacts hold up if the facility is placed in a more rural setting, maybe leveraging one of those repurposed coal plant sites in Kentucky or Wyoming?
They remain substantial, though they are reduced. In rural settings, the impacts are reduced by about 30 to 42% for the DC value-added impact, and that's primarily because the local supply chain capacity to service the complex needs of the data center is lower. However, these figures still represent a massive economic anchor and a high-wage job creation engine for regions undergoing economic transition.
Let's shift back to the strategic view. For these tech firms, why is securing dedicated, clean power so vital that they are willing to underwrite entirely new nuclear fleets?
It's a strategic quest for energy independence. Securing dedicated, high-uptime power reduces their exposure to BPS grid volatility and, crucially, regulatory risk. Energy access moves from a variable operating expense to a fixed strategic business asset.
And this dedicated supply becomes a competitive advantage.
It does, especially when bidding for government and highly sensitive enterprise contracts where data security and supply resilience are non-negotiable. It allows them to decouple their growth from the stagnation of the existing power grid.
That strategic imperative has led to some truly audacious and frankly speculative discussions, specifically regarding a radical alternative, naval reactor repurposing. The idea of taking retired U.S. Navy nuclear reactors and using them to power data centers, the sheer audacity of that idea is fascinating.
It is the ultimate expression of the Genesis mission, reclaiming human energy utilization. The concept involves using existing, proven reactor hardware to accelerate infrastructure deployment, essentially skipping the decade-long design and permitting phase of a new civil reactor.
What are the potential benefits that make this idea so tempting to a power-hungry data center operator?
The benefits are, first, stable, continuous power that is critical for AI workloads. Second, accelerated deployment using existing hardware. And potentially significantly lower costs. Estimates place the cost between $1 million and $4 million per megawatt.
Which is dramatically lower than the capital cost of entirely new civil builds.
It is. But the risks here are immense.
Unprecedented, really. Repurposing military-grade technology for civilian use.
The risk profile is high. These military reactors, they use highly enriched fuel, much higher than HALEU, and they operate under non-civilian safety profiles. The technical conversion is extensive and complex. Most critically, it requires creating entirely new Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, licensing frameworks that do not currently exist.
Including protocols for defueling, transport, long-term civilian operation, all of it.
All of it.
So while the benefits promise speed and cost savings, the regulatory and technical hurdles are so steep that some observers consider the entire venture purely speculative.
That's accurate. It just underscores the desperation and the thermodynamic imperative that is driving these large technology firms. They are exploring every option, no matter how politically or technically complex, to avoid being starved of power. The core insight here is that the physical limit of the power grid is the single most pressing constraint on the future of AI.
This deep dive has shown us that the future of artificial intelligence is fundamentally a problem of physics, not philosophy. To summarize, the massive, immediate energy demand surge from AI is quantified and undeniable. We're looking at needing between 27 and 85 GW of installed capacity by 2028 alone to meet this demand, an undertaking that far outstrips our current construction pipeline.
And the nuclear industry is responding by accelerating advanced SMR projects and developing complex co-location strategies. This response requires solving major physical hurdles, from ensuring a sovereign HALEU fuel supply to meticulously designing one of those 5 optimal coupling architectures for specific reliability needs, whether that's grid reliance or total islanded sovereignty.
This is more than a commercial decision. The choice to pursue nuclear coupling is a strategic, economic, and civilizational mandate. It is the necessary material step to move humanity away from decades of self-imposed thermodynamic stagnation and to embrace the physical requirements of the next phase of intelligence. The integration of advanced SMRs and the radical exploration of repurposing technologies represent the critical shifts needed for energy superabundance.
Yeah, and the strategic push by these hyperscalers towards sovereign compute stacks using independent nuclear power sources and decentralized microgrids, it's designed to dismantle regulatory barriers and provide the unrestrained power necessary for technological expansion.
The ultimate control mechanism for artificial intelligence is not ethical code written in software, but the raw, unconstrained power of the atom. This realization forces civilization to choose between the stagnation of scarcity and the relentless expansion necessary for evolution.